Hello YouTube, my name is Ben Griffin and this is a video all about going around Goliath as fast as possible. Now there are quite a few cars in this game that are up to the task, one being this, the Maserati MC12 Forza Edition. This is one of a number of cars that you can unlock with skill points, which is really good. However, this one is the most expensive because you need the Maserati 300S Coupe, which costs 6 million. So you need 6 million. Luckily though, when you get that, I think this car is 15 skill points plus not that many before that to reach that top right upgrade. Now of course you could sell the 300S Coupe, maybe someone would buy it thinking they're getting a cut price car that has the ability to become this. Sadly though, if you buy an auction 300S Coupe, there is a chance that somebody has already claimed the car. That means you can't. So I would recommend that you buy this, take the hit, and then see if you can sell the car later. I know it's a little bit harsh if somebody buys it, but if you make it cheap enough, they might just be buying it to complete their collection, get every car. And of course this car is very fast. And I've chosen pink because why not? I got a bit bored of my typical orange and it's a very beautiful car. Whether you like the colour or not, this thing is fantastic. And if you know how to set it up, it goes very fast too. It backs up its looks with performance, so that's really cool. Now there are a number of tunes for this car. Some really good, some not so good. Let's go into upgrades and tuning. My tunes. My setup favours the 6.5 litre V12, not the race engine, and that's because you can get a lot more horsepower. 1,515 maximum and nearly 1,500 Nm of torque, which is insane. And the car still only weighs under 1.3 tonnes, which is quite impressive. However, this setup is lighter, so they've taken off one or two parts. This setup I found was a nightmare to control. It's fast, but it's so twitchy, and I just couldn't make it work. Maybe if you've got a steering wheel, or if you're that kind of style driver where you like the twitchiness, this is fine, but it's not a beginner's setup. This one not used so much, but quite similar to mine. As you can see, it's got 10 for all stats except speed. That isn't a bad thing. This is a very fast circuit, the Goliath. It's over 24 miles. But a lot of the time you are not lifting off the accelerator, and if you do, it is very briefly. When you do brake, these cars are immensely capable anyway. So you want a high top speed and a lot of acceleration more than you want sheer top speed, or likewise a lot of acceleration but you top out at sort of 210 because you're losing a lot of time. This setup is for S2, so if you want to do the Goliath Rivals event, I think the fastest I've seen is 7 minutes 40, which is obscene. I don't know if that's with cheating or not, but I've tried this a couple of times, and I think anything under 9 minutes is good. You're really going some. There are probably cars that are much better at this than others, but to get, you know, in the 8s or even the 7s, I mean, I'm not sure, because I get around 740 in this car when it's an X class. As you can see, 782 horsepower and much less torque, a third almost. It is, however, 172 kilograms lighter, so that's good. This setup is by the master, that is DJS. This setup is really decent. It uses the race engine, as far as I'm aware, because you can max that out at 1,185. Much lower torque, slightly lighter. It is really good in terms of downforce, but for some reason I found this just a little bit slower, noticeably slower, than the other engine with 400 odd horsepower, which makes sense. But this is a good place to start, to get a feel for the car, and then you can start tweaking it yourself. Now to do that, you have to go into this complicated load of options and numbers and things. See, this car, under 2.4 seconds to 60, under 4.5 to 100 miles an hour. Those two figures aren't really that important for Goliath because you are going to be well over 100 the entire way. There's an S corner where you're doing about 110 to 130 depending on downforce. And there aren't many moments of that. There's another left-hander that's quite tight where you might dip down to 100, but you're going to be going way, way faster than that. So don't worry too much about those things. Top speed, however, is important. So you don't want it below 230, 240 ideally, because you will hit that a surprising amount of the time. Equally though, you don't want it too high because you'll just never get to it. With this car anyway, even though it's got huge amounts of horsepower, it sort of naturally tops out and doesn't have much more to give. Now gearing with this, you can faff with this as much as you want. These are my settings. They're not fully optimized because there's a lot more this car can do, I think, but it's a reasonable basis. Leaning more towards speed. First is long enough and with all-wheel drive that you can get up to about 70, 80 before shifting, and it's a clean start. Blitz away. You can be past unbeatable opponents in relatively little time with this setup. Second is long enough that you can go through a lot of the corners in this gear and blitz out. There's only one corner that you can do in first. Everything else will be second, but mainly third and fourth. Now third again, leaning towards speed, and fourth, not too much of a difference between the two. You don't actually need fifth and sixth, or at least I've not found a setup where this makes a huge difference, because the amount of horsepower and the torque, you are covered for this circuit up to fourth, and you'll be doing well over 240 miles an hour, sometimes 250 plus. So that's all good. And obviously the less time you spend shifting, the more time you're putting that power down. So if you keep going between third, fourth and fifth, each time you shift, even with manual clutch, there's still that momentary pause. So if you can hold gears longer and still get the power and still get the acceleration, then you're going to be fast. Alignment, not gone into this too much. So if you read on the right, it says start with 0.5 degrees of negative camber on each side, and then you can tweak it to whatever you like. What I would suggest is you drive this car in its standard form first. You'll notice it doesn't turn particularly well, and it's not got very much downforce at all. Actually, on that point, you should fit the front and rear bumpers that allow downforce tuning. That is important. It's important if you want to make this car easier to drive. Maybe there's a way you can do without, and it's very, very fast, but as far as I've found, it's worth having the downforce, because this game rewards handling more than the old game. You could get away with just huge amounts of speed, slow down a lot for a corner and then go again. But in this game, especially if you're trying to set a lap time on Goliath, you want to be able to go around corners fast. You don't want to lose much speed at all, because each straight after them can be very, very long. So you're at a disadvantage if you're having to slow down massively, and a lot of these cars can do both. So you think, oh, this car can do 270, wonderful, but everything else does 260 and can go around the corners 50, 60 miles per hour faster. So I like to increase oversteer, because that allows the front to turn more quickly. The way this is set up on this screen now, it's very, very difficult to make it lose control. So I think you could really push these much, much further, increase downforce, and have a really, really nimble but not slidey car. And if you like that kind of style, that's good. Got your roll bars, which I've softened up at the rear because that helps with oversteer. Again, it just makes that front end more nimble, and I find that's really, really useful. And anyone who's driven the Ultimate 1020, which I'm going to look at in my next video, will know that that can make life much, much faster. So if you're losing a top speed, but you've got huge amounts of downforce and the car's intuitive and goes into corners like an absolute weapon, then you can set really fast times as well. Springs, I've just lowered the ride height a bit, and I've softened up the front and rear. Mainly because the car was taking off, and there's a few bumps in this where it's just nice to sort of soften the car a little bit. Also, I've done this just to keep it nicely in terms of oversteer. I don't want understeer in this car. Oversteer is better. Damping again, this is what I've gone for. Now aero, I've gone for more at the front than the rear. Obviously, air that runs over the car and under the car can help pull the car downwards onto the tarmac, and that allows you to go around corners much faster and can help with stability, stops the car lifting off over jumps. I'm going to need to faff with this a little bit more to see if I can just get the character a bit nicer, but I don't think there's any harm in just fully going with this all the way at the front and a little bit less at the back. And if you then work your way back from that, see what you think. But this car can still do 260 miles an hour, basically. So that's not too bad. And your lateral G's at 120 miles an hour is just over 2. So that's pretty decent.